Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another news and rumor video here to discuss. In today's video, we're looking at some injury updates, some roster moves, and a couple of trade rumors involving the Canucks, the Predators, the Penguins, and a couple of other teams. We'll touch on all this coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get into this video, do not forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers and we're trying to hit 675 by next week's trade deadline. So if you can, leave a subscribe. It really does help with the channel. On top of that, don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. If you haven't already, check out my Buy Me a Coffee page. I'll leave a link to it down in the description below. I'm trying to get a little more money to help out the YouTube channel. So if you can make a donation, it really does help out the YouTube channel. So I really do appreciate it. And also don't forget to stay tuned for next week's live trade deadline video on March 6th, a week today, 11:30 a.m. Mountain Time. We'll do a live stream talking about all the moves that happened on trade deadline day, so don't forget to stay tuned for that. But in today's video, we've got another news and rumor video here to discuss. So there wasn't any signings yesterday, so we have no signings to talk about. So we'll start off by looking at just a couple of injury updates. Only 3 teams here to look at when it comes to some injury updates. Simone Edvinsson, who missed 7 games before the Olympic break with a lower body injury, was actually off of injury reserve and returned to game action on Thursday to help the Red Wings get the win over the Ottawa Senators to win in overtime. So that was a big boost there for the Detroit Red Wings as they got a really solid top 4 defenseman in Simone Edvinsson back into the lineup. So that was a big boost there for the Red Wings. Kuzmenko, who left Wednesday's game with undisclosed injury, didn't play yesterday on Thursday for the Kings and is out day to day. Kuzmenko was a bad loss as the Kings got destroyed yesterday, but there's some speculation he could be back for the game on Saturday against the Flames. So that could be a big boost there for the Kings, but bad to see he didn't play last night. And then Shesterkin, who was out nearly 2 months with a lower body injury. Connor Sherry, who was out 2 months with a lower body injury. And Adam Fox, who was also out nearly 2 months with a lower body injury. All were active off of long-term injury reserve or injured reserve and returned to game action for the Rangers yesterday. So it's a big boost there as the Rangers get arguably their best player in Shesterkin back and one of the best goalies in the entire NHL. And they also get one of the best defensemen in the NHL, Adam Fox, back. And they also get a really solid bottom 6 forward in Connor Sherry. So very interesting note there, but some really big boosts for the Rangers. They get 3 players off of injured reserve. So very interesting note there, but those are all the injury updates from yesterday. So very interesting note there. When it comes to some recalls, reassignments, and some waiver updates, only a few things to talk about here. When it comes to some reassignments, Uchachis, Alexinski, and Coughlin were all reassigned by the Vegas Golden Knights. They were all recalled because the Knights were without 5 regulars due to the Olympics, and I think it was Marner, Stone, Theodore, Hannafin, and Eichel. But those 5 seem to be ready to go for the Vegas Golden Knights next game. So because of that, they don't need those 3 players, Uchachis, Legzinski, and Coughlin at the NHL level anymore. So they reassigned them, and Legzinski actually had a pretty good game against the LA Kings, having 3 assists. So very interesting note there. But those 3 guys are heading back to the AHL for the Vegas Golden Knights. So very interesting note there, but not too surprising. And then when it comes to some waiver updates, yesterday's video we talked about how Sony Milano was on waivers by the Washington Capitals. I said there's a very likely chance he clears because he's making $1.9 million. Not a whole bunch of teams have some cap space, and at best he's like a 4th line forward at this point, and not too surprising. Milano did wind up clearing, so very interesting note there. It's not too surprising. And then 2 more players were placed on waivers yesterday. I don't know the exact outcome at this current point in time, but Mathieu Joseph in St. Louis and Ty Kartye in Seattle were both placed on waivers. Now Joseph, sort of like Milano, I expect to clear. He's making $2.9 million, and he's at best a bottom 6 forward. So I don't think there'll be too many teams who have some interest in that. According to Pagnotta, he says the Blues were trying to trade him earlier in the year, but they were never able to come to terms in any sort of a trade. So now they're waiving him, and the hope is they can maybe try and move him before next week's trade deadline. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but I do not expect Joseph to be claimed. Kartye, on the other hand, is a possibility I think could be claimed. He's younger. I think he's like only 24, 25. He's signed for this year. I'm not sure if he's signed for next year. Either way, he's going to be an RFA at the end of his contract, and he's making just over $1 million, but he's a really skilled 4th line forward. So I think some teams who might be lacking some depth on the forward group, or maybe have an injury or 2 on the forward group, could look to try and add Kartye. I saw a lot of people over on Twitter saying Kartye could be a guy who's very likely to get claimed, and I would agree because he's a really solid bottom 6 forward. So very interesting note there, but Milano cleared waivers, which isn't too surprising, and has been assigned to the AHL by the Washington Capitals, while Mathieu Joseph in St. Louis and Ty Kartye in Seattle are on waivers, and I'll personally expect Joseph to clear and Kartye to be claimed by someone. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But those are all the roster moves and waivers from our past couple of days. And last year, going over to a couple of trade rumors. We've got 4 trade rumors here to talk about today. The first one isn't just a specific trade rumor, it's updates surrounding Vancouver Canucks players. Over the past day, there has been a ton of updates when it comes to some of the Vancouver Canucks players, so I want to touch on 3 specific players here when it comes to the Vancouver Canucks. Now, first I want to talk about Tyler Myers. In yesterday's video, we talked about how he was held out of the first game back for the Vancouver Canucks due to being scratched for trade-related reasons against the Winnipeg Jets. It sounded like there was some sort of a deal that was potentially happening, and there has been some updates about it. So, when it comes to the Tyler Myers situation, it sounds like, according to some recent reports, the Red Wings were the team that had pitched the best offer. Pagnotta, I think, was the one who mentioned that they were offering a second-round pick for Tyler Myers. Now, it doesn't seem like Myers will be overly thrilled to go to Detroit, so at this point in time, he hasn't waived his no-movement clause, even though Detroit does seem like they have a deal on the table, and it seems that they have been talking for the past couple of days, but it doesn't sound like he wants to waive his no-movement clause right now to go to Detroit. So at this point, it seems like that's sort of at stalemate. Now, according to some other recent reports, some of the Oilers insiders are talking about this and said that the Oilers are not in on Tyler Myers, so I know I did mention that in yesterday's video, but it sounds like the Oilers are not a team who has some interest in Tyler Myers. While Rick Dhaliwal, when he was talking about this, also mentions that the Stars, the Avalanche, and the Ducks do still have some interest in Tyler Myers, on top of Detroit being the team who seems to be the frontrunner right now. So it seems like Myers might be more open to waiving his no-movement clause to go to either Colorado or Dallas, much more likely than it would be to go waive to Detroit. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but it definitely is all up to Myers. If Myers doesn't want to waive to go to Detroit, then he won't waive to go to Detroit, and if he does want to waive to go to Detroit, we could see a trade happen in the next couple of days. So it's going to be a very interesting situation to watch out for over the next week, but that's where it sits right now. It seems that the Red Wings were the team who were trying to trade for Tyler Myers. Doesn't sound like Myers wants to waive his no-movement clause to go there, and there are a couple of other teams who do have some interest, it seems like, so very interesting note there. When it comes to Jake DeBrusk and Brock Boeser, when it comes to DeBrusk, there's some recent reports saying that DeBrusk is open to waiving his no-movement clause, and that has led to the Canucks shopping him. So it does seem like the Canucks are open now to moving Jake DeBrusk, who says he is open to a fresh start. So very interesting note there. There's been some talk about Boston and Edmonton when it comes to DeBrusk. I'm sure there's a couple of other teams too who have some major interest, but he was with the Boston Bruins before signing his current contract with Vancouver, and he does have ties to Edmonton, so that makes sense. But it does seem like for the right situation, DeBrusk will be willing to waive his no-movement clause, which has his name out there for the Vancouver Canucks. And another name that's out there for the Vancouver Canucks is Brock Boeser. As according to Darren Dreger, he says Boeser is willing to move and waive his trade protection for the White situation as well. So it's not like he really wants out, but he'd be willing to move for the right situation. So that's a very interesting note there. Boeser's a really solid guy, just signed a 7-year deal. I've seen some people say Boston could be a team who has some interest because they were linked to him in free agency last offseason. On top of that, Minnesota's been linked to Boeser for quite a bit of time. I know they're looking for a center right now, but I do wonder if maybe they try and go after Brock Boeser as well. So very interesting note there. The Canucks seem to be open for business. We've heard about Elias Pettersson over the past couple of weeks. We've heard about Connor Garland. We know they're very likely to move some of their pending UFAs like a Evander Kane or a Teddy Bluger or even a David Kampf, but it seems like more interest is picking up on Tyler Myers, on Jake DeBrusk, and on Brock Boeser. And those are 3 names we're going to have to watch out for over the next little bit. Next, going over to Pierre Lebrun. He says that Nashville's Steven Stamkos does not want to leave Nashville, and his preference would be to stay with the Nashville Predators, who all of a sudden are only a couple of points off a playoff spot. But because of the interest that he has had in him, he did provide the Predators 3 teams to be willing to waive his no-movement clause to go to, because he does have a full no-movement clause after he signed with that Nashville Predators team. And he says the only 3 teams at this point in time, according to Pierre Lebrun, that he'd be willing to waive for are Tampa, Minnesota, or Dallas. So that makes very interesting sense. I think there'd have to be some salary retention for any of those teams, but a return to Tampa would be interesting. Let him walk as a free agent. I'm not sure if they'd have the cap space to bring him back, but that would be an interesting fit, going back to playing with guys like Kucherov at point. I could see that'd be a really good fit for Stamkos. Minnesota, they've been looking for a center. Imagine Stamkos centering the top line with a guy like Kirill Kaprizov. Like, that would be a stellar first line for that Minnesota Wild team. Once again, don't know how they'll pull it off cap-wise, but like that team is really looking for a top-end center, which Stamkos can be. So that could be an option. Another one's Dallas. They've lost Tyler Seguin for the season due to an injury. So because of that, could they have some interest in Stamkos? I think that's a possibility as well. Once again, I think there has to be some salary retention, but they are looking for another top 9 forward. And I think Stamkos could work really well. I think the Preds will most likely want to move him to Tampa because it's not in their division, but it's very interesting out there. So it seems like if there was a Stamkos deal, the only 3 teams he'd be willing to waive his no movement clause for right now would be Tampa, Minnesota, or Dallas. So that's going to be a very interesting situation we'll have to watch out for, as I do have Stamkos on my current 40-player trade bait list on my blog. So definitely, I do think Stamkos was very likely to get moved, but it seems like it's going to be only one of those 3 teams. Next, going over to the Pittsburgh Penguins, are going to Pagnotta. He says, do not expect the Pittsburgh Penguins to add anything for the short term. He says that the only way the Penguins add something before this year's trade deadline is if it's something that could also help them long term. So I'm thinking maybe something similar to what they did with Igor Chinnikov, where they did move a couple of draft picks, but they were able to get a young player who they can help them now and in the future. So unless it's something like that, whether it's a guy who's on the younger side of things, maybe get someone who's signed for a couple of years, unless it's something like that who can help them now and in the future, do not expect the Pittsburgh Penguins to be big buyers, even though they're in a playoff spot. And Pagnotta also did mention that other teams have interest in Anthony Mantha. Mantha is having himself a great season. He's fitting really well with Pittsburgh ever since joining the Penguins in the offseason, and he's fitting really well. Now, there's no guarantee that Mantha will get moved because the Penguins are in a playoff spot, but there's a possibility if there's enough interest and the ask is good enough that the Penguins might be willing to move him for like some sort of a package. I would think maybe like a 2nd round pick and a decent prospect, or maybe like a 3rd round pick and a really good prospect or something like that. That would be my guess. So there's no guarantees that Mantha gets moved because he is on a playoff team in the Pittsburgh Penguins, but he's a Pending UFA, and if the Penguins could recoup a little bit of assets instead of letting him walk as a free agent in the offseason, that might make some sense for them too. So when it comes to the Pittsburgh Penguins, over the next week, do not expect them to add any sort of like Pending UFAs or small pieces or things like that, unless it's something that could also help them in the future. And also keep your eye on Anthony Mantha, as even though they're in a playoff spot, there are a lot of teams who do have some interest in Anthony Mantha, so we'll have to watch out for that. And lastly, here going over to the Nashville Predators, again, both David Pagnotta and Frank Saravalli mentioned this, and they said that trade interest in Erik Haula is starting to come up. So that makes a whole bunch of sense. There's not a whole bunch of Pending UFA centers out there, and Haula's not a top 2 center by any means. So once again, I think Trocheck, Kadri, Shen, those sorts of guys would be the main targets for teams who need a 1 or 2 line center. But for teams who need some sort of a role player type 3rd line center, Haula fits that bill. He signed for this year. He's in the final year of his deal. He's making, I think, just over $3 million. He had a really good showing at the Olympics, had a couple of key goals for Team Finland, and he had some really good play. So with that in mind, after the Olympics, his stock really rose, and with the Preds still being one of those bubble teams, especially given he's a Pending UFA, there's been a lot of talk that Haula could get moved. He's a 3rd line center. He can also play on the wing if need be, and he's a guy who can put you up some points in the right situation. So for teams who don't need a top 2 center, but maybe more of a depth center, like a 3rd or 4th line center, expect them to have some interest in Erik Haula, and I could definitely see Haula get moved because he is a Pending UFA, and the Preds are a bubble team to potentially make the playoffs. So I'm not going to say it's a guarantee, but I definitely can see why there's a lot more interest now in Erik Haula than there was in the last little bit. So definitely, we'll have to wait and see on this, but I personally do think we could see a Haula trade before the trade deadline. So definitely, I have your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. Do you think we see an Erik Haula trade before this year's trade deadline? Do you think we wind up seeing the Penguins move on from Mantha, and could they add someone maybe for the longer term before the trade deadline? Do you think Stamkos gets moved, and if so, could one of Tampa, Minnesota, or Dallas have some interest? And what about the Canucks? Do you think Myers does eventually get moved, and could we see DeBrusk or Boeser get dealt before the trade deadline? Definitely. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this, plus all the roster movement and injuries from our past couple of days. That's all I'm going to talk for today. Remember to like this video, and if you really liked it, remember to subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. I also do a blog to news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. I'll link to it in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.